Hello, listeners, and welcome to Pop Screen, part of the Geek Show podcast network. We are that corner of the Geek Show that likes to deal with the good, the bad, and the befuddling of movies, either starring, about, or by pop stars. No, the podcast covers a broad range of musical and cinematic genres, from country and western to hip-hop, from documentaries to science fiction. I'm your host, Graham Williamson. I'm a filmmaker and writer for the Geek Show and Byline Times, and I'm joined this week by...
Mark Harrison. I'm a writer for Film Stories, Yahoo, Vodzilla, various other places, and occasional quizmaster as well. How are you doing, Graham?
I'm good, yes. I'm very happy to be talking about television, which is not my normal mode.
Yeah, is this a first for, other than TV movies and stuff, is this the first time you've done TV on the podcast?
We have done one mini-series before, and that did have Jarvis Cocker in, so the circumstances were special, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yes, we are doing It's a Sin. Mark has successfully persuaded me to do It's a Sin by the very successful and popular dramatist Russell T Davies. I really enjoyed it, Mark. Has he got anything else in the pipeline?
Oh, I don't know. There's Nolly. There's this show Nolly that was on ITV. It was quite good. It's like sort of more in the vein of a very English scandal, and that's probably the most well thing he's done. But yeah, Nolly is kind of an ITV thing about ITV's original sin of sacking off Noel Gordon with no explanation. And Doctor Who. There's some Doctor Who this month. We got
Yes.
How long into an episode of this podcast without mentioning Doctor Who?
It did strike me as odd that we scheduled this because I wanted to have a sort of proxy for talking about the Doctor Who 60th anniversary, and then I remembered all of our podcasts end up with us talking about Doctor Who anyway, so why did I need to do that?
That's true. And if only the first time they brought it back, they had, like, I don't know, a musician who was acting or something. Not sure. It's for another time. It's for another time. We're doing It's a Sin, which
Yes,
very much has, very much has again, fits in the remit of a podcast, doesn't it? It's a singing pop star kind of acting.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fully canonical pop screen stuff with Olly Alexander from Years and Years, the band, not the previous Russell T Davies series. And an awful lot of period appropriate music on the soundtrack as well, of course.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it happens more and more now, just off the TV. Probably because it's coming down from the film side, really, is Davies wrote all the songs into the scripts. There's a lot of good interviews you can read about him talking about the process of that, because knowing in advance what you want clearing. Some stuff he got, some stuff didn't. So that's kind of written into the script. So the way that plays into the drama is something we should talk about as well as we go through. Because, from the top, it's called It's a Sin. Have you heard what this was originally going to be called? Do you know
I know there was a time when it was called The Boys, and then
it was indeed.
A certain Amazon series beat them to that one.
Yeah, you don't really want to invite conversations among the worst people on the internet. Who's the bigger anti-hero, Homelander or Richie Tozer? Which, you would get if they were both called The Boys. But yes. Yeah, for a long time, this is one of those things that, like, when you look back into the history of it, Davies was talking about doing when he was working at Granada back in 1995.
Back when Granada existed.
Back when, yeah. I mean, yeah, it just, this story a little bit, doesn't it, that Granada existed. But, this is pre-Queer as Folk, but around the time Davies was doing soaps and stuff at Granada and ITV. And it's just sort of carried on along then, like everything else that's happened, like Queer as Folk and Doctor Who and stuff. There's an excellent book about his time writing on Doctor Who called The Writer's Tale that's more or less just email correspondence for a Doctor Who magazine feature that escaped and became like an 800-page book. But there's
Yes.
stuff in that where he talks about he wants to do a drama about, the people he knew who had AIDS in the 1980s, about gay men, and kind of working on that show, you end up stealing ideas for scenes that he had in that show, just because it's a show that eats ideas all the way along.
Yeah.
And in between, post Doctor Who, there was kind of the big multimedia kind of gay drama universe that came out of Channel 4, wasn't it? With like Cucumber and Banana. And there's been various things in between, and he got to do it at Channel 4 in the end, 2020.
Yeah, with some resistance as well. I was fascinated reading about this because you assume that Davies is now at the stage where his post-it notes could get a commission, and I think part of his talent is not doing that. But in fact, he had to fight really hard to get this, and there is a fascinating sort of detail that some unnamed executive says, "Oh, I never want anyone to pitch me that miserable AIDS drama again." And I've said I don't watch much television, and I do honestly think that the standard of like golden age of TV drama writing is so far below like a middling episode of Play for Today from 1976. And I think that does expose it, doesn't it? If something like this, which is probably the most celebratory, accessible drama you can make about AIDS in the 80s without lying about the subject, if this is considered too miserable to make, it's no wonder modern TV drama is so lightweight, I think.
Yeah, well, it's something that in the modern sort of licensing and streaming landscape, when It's a Sin pops up on Disney Plus, you're kind of like, oh, well, It's a Sin is on, well, it's on Star, isn't it? It's on the adult wing of
Yes,
it, I
yeah,
guess. It's on the 18 plus wing of Disney Plus, but nevertheless, there it is. It's not something
yeah.
that you can cut references out of to sell overseas, but then I would imagine It's a Sin is not on in every territory. It is the thing and the interesting thing of executives and whatnot, because there's other stuff in the interviews from this where Davies has talked about how when they were making Queer as Folk, there's an episode of that where a man dies on a one night stand. So it's kind of like a dark thing. What's this kind of fun? And was at the time controversially fun. There was sort of an element of, can gay men have this? And at the time, it's what was needed. It's the state of the, show what the nightlife is like and all the rest of it. It's not just defined by AIDS. At the time, that was, was groundbreaking. And on It's a Sin, he faced the opposite battle because in episode 1, you have this sequence of Richie's moved to London and has this sort of like halting first sexual encounter that's, massively awkward for him. But then once he gets into the swing, there's this montage set to Hooked on Classics Part 1 and 2 that just goes and goes as he goes and goes. And
Do you think
it's one
that
of
was
those
like?
things that he had to battle. Yeah, sorry.
Do you think that was part of the negotiations? Do you think, all right, I want to have this sequence, but in order to make it much less dangerously erotic, I'm going to play Hooked on Classics over all of it?
Yeah, well, he's talked about his he talks about having to battle it because Channel 4 basically said, "Do we want this cut in half? Like we need less. Like
Yeah,
maybe like this montage should be about half as long." And it was he said in interviews that was it's like you get to have one executive strop on a TV show, and he sort of had his early on to go, we have to keep that. But it's sort of the opposite situation as you're into Queer as Folk to go like, no, they're kind of saying this is a very serious drama. He's like, yeah, but you
yeah,
do
yeah.
need a thing. And that's backed up towards the end of the series as well. It's a thing of like this lost generation of gay men who died of AIDS kind of being celebrated as much as commemorated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I do think the sort of sexual aspect of the drama is interesting because that's
Yeah.
always going to be the difficulty of making a
Yeah.
drama about AIDS. Yeah, bring him on, bring the boy on,
Dog on the pod.
dog on the pod.
Okay. Yeah, so that's in like Hooked on Classics is the early example though, isn't it? Of
Yeah,
Davies said that he wanted to have not stuff that's like because when you see a movie or a TV show that's set in the 80s, it will just automatically play the biggest number ones. But
yeah,
because it's something that rolls throughout the 80s, it's something that whichever the scene setting was, he would like look at the top 30 and 40 from a few weeks before. So it's that thing, isn't it? It's the Back to the Future thing of them having to build that town but not make it look pristine and brand new because it wouldn't be.
Yes.
And that's like an important bit of period detail that I think, is on a production design front, that's just baked in. And in music, less so, I think. You get the most obvious, you get a lot of song choices.
Well,
Like, whenever it's set, at the point where somebody, you hear the intro to Sympathy for the Devil by the Rolling Stones, or it's up someone who's maybe a bit morally ambiguous, you're like, no, all right, they've just phoned this in. With this is like designed and curated as songs that he was into throughout the decade.
Well, speaking of sort of clot-hoppingly obvious drama set in the 80s, do you
Yeah.
think that Russell T Davies is angry that Stranger Things gets all the credit for rediscovering Running Up That Hill?
Well, you can tell that an interview is from a certain time. Like, it's aged quickly because
Yeah.
it's kind of talking about Kate Bush personally giving Russell T Davies permission to use that. She doesn't often give permission to use songs in the show. It's like, well, a year later, she was like, oh, maybe I'll give that another go. And we got the only
Yes.
good bit of that season of Stranger Things.
But
But it's
yeah,
the I was talking about this with a mate the other day. He's older than me, kind of saying that, like, people go on about, there's that thing going around, isn't there? Like, Gen Z did what the old generations didn't and got Running Up That Hill to number one. And he pointed out, well,
yeah.
no, because the thing is, music was better at the time, is the reason why Running Up That Hill was number one. It's like, if it's climbing up the charts now, it's because there's what resistance is there? It's just in the quality of chart music, I mean, the quality of what's in the charts rather than music
No,
in general. Yeah, but
I'm
it's
still not convinced. I hate the 80s, but
fair.
yeah, there are some very good choices in here. I'm always surprised that the bonanza of 80s nostalgia that we've been living with for what feels like about 8 decades has never really reclaimed Erasure. So I really enjoyed hearing all the more in this,
Yeah.
and it's doubly appropriate because Andy Bell is HIV positive, and I remember finding that out when I was like a teenage Erasure fan and
Yeah.
thinking, because this was how AIDS was thought at the time, thinking, oh, he's HIV positive. Oh, that's terrible. He's going to die soon. And of course,
Mm.
he's still with us. But it is. I was too young to really remember like the AIDS crisis as it happened, but it had a long tail, and I do remember how the attitudes it engendered stuck around for a very long time.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things on that. Like, I bloody love Erasure. I've often said that, like, I'd like La La Land better if it was a movie where Ryan Gosling was just really into the songs sometimes and wanted to start a club where he just played the songs sometimes. Because I like that better than all of jazz. But on top of that, there's it speaks to a little bit. I think it's episode 4 where you have the character who's a teacher, like he goes and is a teacher and is tasked with suffers kind of like kind of homophobic bullying at work, but is like more or
Yeah,
less straight away put into the library and saying, because of clause 28, we have to take out any literature that has this, and has
yeah.
this sort of like, it's a retrospective thing. It's like, it's sort of done as, oh, this is what I would have said if I'd thought to say it in the time. And it kind of
Yes.
goes on this blazing rant about how Shakespeare, Dickens, like there's nothing in there.
Yeah.
There's no representation of it. And then that's come around kind of like there aren't that many, certainly not a show that's hit this big, that was this widely watched, that sort of chronicled that. Like, it's mad that the story's been there all this time. And, Davies has spoken about some anxiety that like someone else is going to do a series
Yeah.
like this, and then it's been done. But like, when it comes to it, that's just there. Like, representations of this sort of thing in culture hasn't come through, has
No,
it? And
absolutely.
to be done as nuanced as it is, that there is fun in it as well as tragedy.
Absolutely, yeah. The only sort, like you say, there's nothing that's been as big as this, but the main thing that I think of in terms of recent dramas that have looked at this era of history is the great French film 120 Beats per Minute
Yeah,
about the ACT UP movement, which we do see It's a Sin's take of in, I think it is in episode 4, around the time of that library plot line. But it's interesting because 120 beats per minute is very, very closely like based on Robin Campillo, the writer and director's time in that activist movement. And for all that Davies has said, he's got a lot of investment in this era. He lived through this era. He remembers so much from this era. He's also moulding it to remind you of the present. The ACT UP protest, the anti-farmer protest, the dying in It's a Sin, is much more like something Extinction Rebellion or Just Stop Oil would do rather than
Yeah.
ACT UP. And I think that the library thing is something that he probably couldn't have predicted at the time it was written, that would be topical again, but it
Yeah,
is.
I did kind of, upon rewatching, I went and had to look back, like, is this sort of pulled from headlines or it's come out the other way, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And that's led by the Richie's friend in all of this, like Jill Baxter, the character played by Lydia West from Years and Years, the Russell T Davies drama, not the band, who's kind of based on a real character. Who's like it's Davies said like it's as much a tribute to her as the woman who he knew, who was his friend who went and sat with men in hospitals on wards when there was all the the horrifying conditions of the not knowing about everything.
Yeah.
And then there's kind of another tribute to her in it as well, because I think she plays the character's mum. Like she
Yes.
sort of plays her own mum in it, doesn't she?
Yes, she does. Yeah. And I mean, that era of where people didn't know how infectious AIDS was. They knew some of the ways it was transmitted, but didn't know what its limitations were. That is something that my mum she was nursing during that time, and her main memory is that if an AIDS patient had a meal, you had to put the plates and the knife and fork in the incinerator afterwards, which is something that we see a number of times in here. Episode 3 ends with that awful funeral pyre where it's
Yeah.
like it's not enough that he's dead, it's like every trace of him has to be removed. I mean, it quickly got a reputation for being absolutely gut-wrenching, and for all we've both said that there are a lot of lighter moments in it, there are a lot of fun moments in it. When it needs to punch hard, it punches hard.
Yeah, I mean the pyre for Gloria, the sort of
Yeah.
like bonfire of his entire existence by his family being set. It's just another musical choice being juxtaposed with "Only You" by
Yes.
Yazoo, which they're performing in the club. Like I fucking love that song, and it's just one of those songs that's like now become associated with a needle drop in a TV show or a film. It's like I'm still not all right after like Under Pressure in After Sun like a year and a bit later, and
Yeah.
coming back to this now, I think I'd just about forgotten until rewatching it recently, and God, it's devastating. But as you mentioned, on top of that, I had, because of the tone of the thing, forgotten about the sort of like really dark little jokes. There's like a bit at the beginning of episode 4 where they crash a funeral because the deceased's boyfriend has been barred by his family, and they kind of make a scene, which is
Yeah.
quite right and all that. But like when they're outside, there's this very short old man with a walking stick who shouts "bastards" and starts walking towards them, like storming over very, very slowly, like to the point where they can just pretty much
Yes.
stand still and carry on their conversation, which is about whose funeral they're going to next. All the while, this
Yeah.
guy's like hobbling up, and it's like, God, that's funny, but God, that's harrowing. It's just so well done
Yeah.
and brilliantly directed by Peter Hoare as well, who's fantastic.
Well, we should talk about Peter Hoare. He's an interesting guy. I mean, he'd said that the thing that got him into TV directing, that made him think, oh, wow, that these things that appear on my screen are made and I want to make them, was Doctor Who. And he got his chance to direct Doctor Who with A Good Man Goes to War, a Matt Smith episode. He'll get a
Yeah.
chance to direct it again in one of Davies' upcoming episodes. But he also directed Regression of the Daleks.
Yeah, I mean, he's finding it. I'm amazed it took him this long to find an excuse to get the Daleks into something again. Really, it was once a series when he was running it. But yeah, it's this. It's done as a tribute to. There's an
Dursley
actor called Dursley
McClendon.
McClendon, isn't there? Who starred in Remembrance of the Daleks,
Remembrance.
which is a real 80s Doctor thing who
Yeah.
died of AIDS, and that's kind of like baked into Richie's character all the way through. There's like little similarities
They're both
Even
Mikes,
throughout
for
that most,
example.
most.
Yeah.
But I think that was like in between series of Doctor Who or something. So like Doctor Who magazine gave like a full front page spread for Regression of the Daleks, which is this made up story like with a feature on It's a Sin, which I imagine brought some crossover viewers. I think it's fair to say that like episode 4 is maybe the most Russell T Davies episode of the most Russell T Davies show, because it's got Daleks, it's got the protest bit at the end, the bit with Richie charging and piggyback. It's got the devastating hometown stuff. It's got mums, like the way he writes mums, and in this, obviously, it's turned to mortifying different angles. But I love the bit when he kind of goes home in episode 4, finds him cooking that casserole, and it's like, oh, I just used steak in the fridge. It's like, all right, well, we'll just have a very expensive stew, because there's a difference between. I love like the details of the mothers that he writes. Is always brilliant. Yeah, but the ballet and the headlights and everything else, and that the bit at the end, which is like I wanted to come and tell all my mates, who are you, Leanne? Hi, Leanne. I just wanted to tell my mates and Leanne. God, it's really funny. Is this thing on top of being absolutely gut wrenching?
Yeah,
in harsh bits.
No, absolutely. And I think I'm glad you brought up that family meal, because for me, it's one of the most effective scenes in it, and it gains a bit of power because, despite what you've said, it's not very Russell T Davies at all. It's very still and quiet. There's no music. This is an episode that begins with Richie checking for HIV symptoms to the sound of the Eurythmics. So it's had time to bed in this approach that it's going to be kind of a jukebox musical on TV. But stripping that away is just devastatingly effective.
Yeah. Well, notably, the track that does come up in the episode is It's a Sin. It's the title track.
Of course.
The moment that it arrives as well, it's him in his hometown. It's a thing that that song had been number one and all the rest of it. It's like it has the thing where it was associated with, it's got a gay fan base because of the subject of the song and all the rest of it. But it's a thing of masking kind of while he's at the jukebox, if you know what I mean. It's like,
yes,
there's sort of this thing where obviously he kind of then has that sort of night out with the schoolmate afterwards. But it's just the moment when that arrives, when the title track drops, I think is one of the most effective drops in it. Like, even if it wasn't intended to be, there's points where like Love Will Tear Us Apart is in it as well, and Davies has joked that like you could use that as the title for the show as well. But when it arrives in that, it's just like, in researching this, like looking back again at the time, some of the mad shit and press coverage about the Pet Shop Boys at the time. Like, I think that this scene's like a little bit later in the action, isn't it? So like at this point, there'd already been Christmas #1, with Always on My mind, and there's just this backlash because it's just like the backlash of like, how dare they cover Elvis, for one thing, and the element of, if it's a gay man and he's not singing a song that's really happy, then this must be about AIDS in some way, in the way the press coverage is done. But then, the ridiculous thing that was going around about where the Pet Shop Boys got their name from.
I am aware of this.
Yeah, they was named for their friends who worked in a pet shop who were boys. And there was this thing that goes around in like the fucking military industrial complex that was just the officers of the Sun and whatever other cunts just sat making shit up. Was that it was it was an exotic American gay sex act where you put a hamster up your asshole. Like, what the fuck? Like, absolute cesspit.
Contrarily, there's like a very early Pet Shop Boys single. I forget which one it is. I think it might be Love Comes Quickly, where Chris Lowe had like a big hat on the front that said "boy" across it. And I remember at the time, Neil Tennant was like, "Oh, this is going to be the point where they work it out. This is going to be the point where they realise we're gay." And Britain just saw that image and thought, "Yes, he is a boy." It's this weird mixture of
that is a boy.
prurience and complete obliviousness that surrounded gay identity at the time.
Yeah, I'm going to keep hitting episode 4 because, as I said, I think it's possibly the best. It's the best episode, but it's the one that opens with they do that infomercial sort of thing that was on. I don't know if that's the right word, but the public information thing that's like sort of John Hurt voiced over at the beginning.
Rich, directed by Nicholas Roeg, by the way. That
Oh well, they knew they
no
were
wonder it's
fucking getting mad, didn't
terrifying.
they? Yeah,
Yeah.
but they kind of show that, and Richie sees it in the Pink Palace, and kind of saying like, "My mother will see this," and it cuts to the house, and they are just fucking oblivious. It's like they just turn over and
Yes.
watch. Ironically enough, Michael Barrymore.
Yes, that's great. And I want to talk about that aspect of Richie where he is quite conservative on some levels. I mean, there were
Yeah,
obviously, before Davies started talking about Dursley McClendon, which is obviously a reference that a Doctor Who obsessive would get, but you can't expect anyone else to. But a lot of people were saying, oh, Davies has written a series about being gay in the 80s. This is the lead character. This must be Davies' mouthpiece. But
mm,
Richie's a difficult little fucker. You know, it's interesting that he is, when that library storyline is going on, he's the one saying, oh, I think it's all right. You can't have kids being taught about being gay. He has this very fearful aspect to him. He knows he's been the target of prejudice. And rather
yeah,
than, sometimes he does fight that. He turns up on the protests. He talks to all of his friends and Leanne about it. Um, but there is also a part of him that thinks maybe if I just keep really quiet and don't ask anyone for anything, this
mm,
will just go away.
yeah. Well, when shame is a massive theme throughout it. Really,
Yeah, yeah.
when you have Gloria's family kind
Mm.
of as raising all existence, but then in that thing, it's in that scene as well that they mentioned that Richie voted for Thatcher at the last election, while the rest of them are,
Yes.
what the fuck? They call him an old Tory and all the rest of it, and it is just stuff that it's like learned from that family base, isn't it?
Yeah.
That like the shame that comes from his parents, it really starts rummaging into in episode 5, which even having seen it, watching back again, it's the first time I've watched it since it was first on. Keeley
Mm.
Hawes last episode is just mortifyingly good. Like that thing on the ward of just like where she just runs the gamut through every single emotion imaginable. Where she has that Barney with someone else who's visiting, she's like taking it all out on Jill and all that other stuff, and then
Yeah.
later on in the bit where she's kind of like, they're taking him back home and they're infantilizing him a bit. It's like they're reading Watership down to him and this other
Yeah.
stuff because they're putting on old records for him because they don't know what else to do. But there's just the one throwaway thing that's like, it's not meant to give you sympathy. It's more exposition than empathy. Where there's just a line about like, oh, do you remember when your granddad was in hospital? Do you remember him? And he says, yeah. And she says this aside where she says he was a terrible man, and there's no
Yes.
more than that, and it's just God, the depth in it. And this is what I mean about like, and it's not one of his mums. It's not a Jackie Tyler. It's maybe a little bit
Mm.
of Noble's mum at worst moments, but it's the God. It's just really densely shot through. Considering it was, as you mentioned, it's a battle to get it made. It was supposed to be, it was pitched as an 8-episode show, and
Yeah.
whether for budget or whatever, Channel 4 commissioned it for 5 episodes. And I think knowing that going back, you can see where it's so fast paced, even as it covers ground. You can see where this maybe would have been an episode on its own in the longer version
Yeah.
of this. It's the most pared down version of what it is, and it still crams so much in.
And I'm glad it is. I think one of
Mm.
the things that alienates me from a lot of modern television is that the goal is usually to like fill out 7 seasons with one story, and
Oh,
everything
sure.
ends up padded out and underlined and overemphasized. And I love that there are little tiny things like that in. But I mean, do you think? I think it feels mad saying this because she is such a big star, and every TV show she appears in seems to be a hit. Do you think
Mm.
people are still sleeping on how good Keeley Hawes is?
I think so. It's the only
Yeah, I would
reasonable
say so.
explanation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mad imbalance in general, isn't it? Is that you get
Mm.
household names doesn't seem. I mean, there's certainly female stars who can launch TV show. Sarah Lancashire, Suran Jones, who have come out with soap.
Yeah.
And I think that's it, where there's already a familiarity, but then that works against you sometimes with soap, doesn't it? Because they can't see you as anything other than that character.
Yeah.
But yeah, Keely Hawes is just fucking extraordinary and everything. But this, especially, I think, is some of the best I've ever seen her because that's such a. She's, as I say, it's not that she's a sympathetic character. She doesn't make that character sympathetic, but you can. It
She's an
takes something to play that
understandable
character.
character. Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's the key to it. It's
yeah,
like
she's
she is humanized and she is human, but
yeah,
you were always aware that she has caused tremendous pain.
yeah, and he's got such a knack for that, like the sort of he's got such a knack for the dialogue, like the sort of
Yeah,
snippy, kind of realizing in 1 minute, like I've fucked up and I haven't handled this very well, is the line she says, and then as soon as Jill agrees with her, it's like, oh, so it's my fault, is it? Like that sort of
yes,
thing. That's so bedded in the fucking British psyche in
yeah,
general, but like,
yeah,
but it's devastatingly played here. Um,
yeah. We should talk about all the cast, I think. I think
yeah.
Callum Scott Howells, who this was his first role, wasn't it? Or something
Uh,
like that. His very early career, at least.
he's very well cast as sort of like the baby guy of the group, who
Yeah,
like just as the virginal one of the group, like little, like it vaguely looks like that episode of This Time with Alan Partridge where he de-ages himself so he can tell a thing about his school. Like he sort of looks like Steve Coogan's face projected onto a boy. There's like that, there's that aspect to it, which is get a little personal. It works really well for the character, is what I'm saying. Like Colin
yeah.
is adorable all the way through.
And
God, the thing, and again, so well characterized. Just the thing of when he moves out of the suit shop into the print shop, and it's kind of like, I've got a key to the shop, and it's like, oh, what did you get my money? Is that promotion or is it? He's like, I've got a key to the
yeah,
shop. It's kind of like, do you understand what this means? Because just, and of course, Welsh. So just what a gorgeous character that he is, and again, another gut punch needle drop moment is the him going and opening up the shop and freedom by one play, which hits
yes,
differently now than it would have then maybe, but yeah, it's and yeah, just dropping out of that, and God, it's a good show. It's like every knowing what's going to happen this time, I still found it devastating every time. Like I kind
I
of
think.
like braced myself to start rewatching it. Like I thought I'll be
mm,
okay. I'll watch episode 1, and like I'll watch that, and then I'll come back to it later. Those are the two things that I thought. I was wrong. I ended up watching another episode right afterwards because it's such compulsive view. And second, I forgot
Same.
about Neil Patrick Harris doing the dramatic work of his life in
Yes.
episode 1. It just
No.
draws you back in, even having seen it. It's just devastating.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it helps that it's not exactly a drama that's reliant on surprises. I think obviously there will be people, there are people who die in it, but it's not tasteless enough to make a question of who dies and who survives. That isn't a
Yeah.
driver of it. I think they intend you to know that not all of these characters will make it out because there are those painful jokes in the early episodes where they're talking about how like gross it is that one of them slept with someone over 30, and of course that quite a lot of them won't be like making that age. It does want you to get that, I think.
Yeah, there's like lashings of dramatic irony, but
Mhm.
it's not doing her throw forward and then like 10 years earlier, here's what happened in the Pink Palace, like so many other TV shows seem to do now. Certainly, like a lot of stuff that was coming out as box sets in that
Yes.
early 2021 surprise lockdown phase of of the last few years. Um, yeah, so this this it's kind of intros on, you almost get title cards for each of the three characters it's going to follow. Like you get Richie, you get Roscoe, you get Colin.
Yeah.
But it's not about how all three of these fell into tragedy. There's tragic overtones and dramatic irony that comes with that. But yeah, Roscoe's story is, I'd forgotten about how that resolves as it went on, like the stuff with his family by the last
Yes.
episode. I'd forgotten about that. So yeah, it's as you say, it's not like done as like absolute poor face drama. So they had to fight for the hooked on classics sex montage at the beginning. They had to have
They
the
had to
shades of
have
lightness and
Roscoe.
dark.
They had to have Roscoe pissing Margaret Thatcher's coffee.
Yeah, the celebrity historical outing. See what I mean? It's the it's the most RTD episode of the most RTD thing. That's all in episode 4. God, Stephen Fry is that character as well. Like, it's just the
That's
thing of the big
inspired.
press.
Yeah.
Yeah, the two big guest stars, once in future Doctor Who guest stars, as well as that Stephen Fry had just been in it. I think at that point,
Yeah.
and Neil Patrick Harris is going to be. It's like they lend so much to that because it is a drama about young people, but it situates it all so well, and as things of the 80s, as icons of the 80s, really, of that old fucking Tory who's like with tendencies towards men, but he's getting a boner at fucking Thatcher. Coming for a cup of coffee.
I think it's very good at dealing with that older generation of gay men without. I mean, Stephen Fry's character is villainized because he's a fucking villain, but mostly it's kind of there's a sadness to it. I love the boss that Colin has
Yeah.
in his first job, who's like Uncle with Neil's Uncle Monty if he was trapped in Phantom Thread, and he's a sort of ridiculous character, and Colin doesn't pay much heed to him, but you do get this picture of like it's very easy to be judgmental in a drama about AIDS. And I think characters like that really sort of answer the question before anyone's asked it of, why were these people so promiscuous? Why were they out all night? Why were they swapping partners? And it's like, because for years before it, their only life option was to be the sad old man in the clothing shop who occasionally got to feel up the young sort of trainees. And I think that's really again, like Richie's mum, it's very carefully layered into a drama that is about something else.
Yeah. I mean, it's the beginning, like the way the freedom it gives him at the beginning, like from from episode 1, even just showing him going from the Isle of Wight to London with like and all
Yeah,
the gear playing over the top. So there's a bit of a build in that
yeah.
intro as it goes on. It just kind of launches itself into that. Yeah, and then
And
you've got that at the
Roscoe getting
top.
to leave his family as well, that's a
Yeah,
really triumphant moment.
yeah,
Yeah,
to Kelly Marie. Yeah, same deal. You've got that in episode 1, and then by the end, you still have the thing of like the defiance of when he's on his childhood bed about to die. Richie kind of talking about how fun it was. Like that's the underlines just says like how fun it all was,
yeah,
despite this. That you'd do it again and all this kind of thing, and it's what it needs. It's such a tightrope to walk all the way
yeah,
through it. But as you say, it's an emotional gut punch whenever I was around to that. But it's still so watchable and
yeah,
compulsive. It's really well done. I've kind of
yeah.
forgotten how well done it was until revisiting it for this.
We've talked about a lot of the music drops and a lot of the classic songs included here, but we haven't talked about the vintage musical number "A Date with Madame Guillotine" from the West End hit "The French Revolution," have we?
Yeah, no, what with that kind of like, yeah, there's a lot of 80s theatre references throughout, isn't it?
I love the fact, like, if they just had Lydia West's character going into an audition and it had like a sign saying "Today rehearsals for the French Revolution," you'd have thought, "Oh, that's a bit shit. They couldn't get the rights for Les Mis." The fact that there's an actual production number in it just
Yeah.
takes that limitation and makes it into something amazing. I think it's so extra, as they say.
Yeah, but it's the thing of like aside from soundtracks, it's like the cultural landscape in it, isn't it? And
Yeah,
like the 80s theatre stuff is so specific. Like whether they pull out Hay Fever, and I don't know if that was a big hit or not, but I get that from the way that everyone goes on about it. It's that, whereas most 80s things are going to be like, well, to name the other fucking Kate Bush needle dropping show would be, oh, we're all in the cinema. What's on? It's Back to the Future. Because if you went to the
yes.
cinema any given week in the 80s, that's what it would be. The best film of the decade. That's how you know it's the 80s. It was better then, sort of thing. But like, it's, they've got a Highlander poster up on the wall and the thing, which is like a much less, it's still, a touch point, but it feels much more specific is the point. And it's what it's what Davies brings to Doctor Who when it comes back
Yeah.
in the noughties, not as quite as, it doesn't even have to be like as baldly as having a finale with The Weakest Link and Big Brother, which incidentally has aged very, very well. All the people who say like that doesn't count because they're not on anymore. Because guess what? The point that it's making about how we've run out of ideas and we're just recycling them is back. Even without
Yeah.
that, you have the noughties that he situates it in early on as the good and the bad. It has Matt Baker making an alien spaceship cake on Blue Peter when one crashes into Big Ben, and
Yeah.
but also has the fat phobia and other attendant bits of the noughties that haven't aged as well in that version of Doctor Who. But
Yeah.
it's what he brings to it, the sense of the present, even though that Doctor Who is never specifically set in a year. It's literally, they never mention 2005, and then everything after that is 1 year from when she set off. Because they want
Yeah.
it to not age poorly, they want it to go into other markets. This is something that has to be incredibly specific, but that same tendency and trend of like what was going on in the world is there in spades as well. That it's not the most obvious needle drops, it's what was in the charts a few weeks before, whenever this is meant to be.
Yeah, because you have to go across certain kind of cultural lines when you're making a show like this. It's one thing when maybe in the Pink Palace they'll be like listening to Yazoo or something like that, but every
Yeah.
now and then Richie has to go back home and they are watching, well, Michael Barrymore, which is obviously kind of a layered reference to the past, but it
Mm.
has to have that element that the more purely nostalgic shows don't have. It has to have that element of the crap 80s in it, the 80s that isn't revived, the 80s that people don't dress up as for parties.
Yeah, it had a very nice angle on a thing I don't normally like the comedic, dramatic irony thing. Where the one I think of is there's a gag in Ricky Gervais and Stephen Merchant's film Cemetery Junction, which is set in the 70s, about like, why don't you dress up like a proper man, like Elton John? Which is like in the
Yes,
delivery of it, yeah, is in the
yeah.
delivery of, oh, they would later find out that he wasn't a proper man. Like
If
the version of it they
only
have
they
in this
knew.
is
Yeah.
yeah, the version of that you have in this is them talking about Derek Jacobi, like is he
Mm.
or isn't he? And they're kind of like, oh, if he was, well, he'd never work again, and all this kind of thing. And it's like it's situated in something that's like,
Wait, I'm going to slightly correct you there because I remember
sorry, go on.
exactly what that line was, and it's one of my favourite examples of like how this uses retrospective wisdom
Yeah,
well. When they're talking about Derek Jacobi, they say, "Oh yeah, he's got a boyfriend. You know, they just go around together backstage. You know, they're open," and
yeah,
I think that is brilliant because there is a reason baked into the drama why they have this retrospectively sort of ironic or knowledgeable attitude, which
yeah,
a lot
that's
of
right.
these things don't bother with.
I think I was getting my wires crossed with Richie saying, like, with Richie's fear of not working again. If no, you're
Yeah.
right. That is, Um, but yeah, just the specificity of it is like such a thing that you would look for in period dramas rather than this is
Mm,
just what was in the chart at the time sort of thing.
yeah.
It's like there's a from the soundtrack down. It's not cool songs, but songs that Russell T Davies loved.
Although some of them are incredibly cool songs,
Oh
of
yeah, they're
course.
still great, still bangers.
Yeah. But yeah, let's talk about a bit more about Davies in general because this is I think the no, Years and Years was in between these, but he did do another drama about British politics in recent history, which is a very English scandal, which I am hugely fond of. I think is perhaps
Yeah,
my favourite thing he's done, and that has
it's his Coen Brothers movie, isn't it? Really, it's
yes,
sort of like a
yeah,
just
that's it. I'd heard it described as a stupid House of Cards, but Russell T Davies' Fargo is even better. Yeah. But that also has that sort of it has a few little nudges like that in, but it also knows that the much bigger part of what it has to do is establish what the stakes are for a man like Norman Scott to be out or to be even just rumored to be gay in this
hmm,
time. And I think, yeah, that I'd love to see how we do with an actual historical drama. Like, could he bring that kind of layering into something set in the 19th century or something? I don't know.
hmm. Well, it's one of those things where while he's doing Doctor Who, these things get parked, but you just hear about stuff he's working on because he talks about in
Yeah.
interviews, and he's talked a lot about wanting to adapt like the old Curiosity Shop. I know he did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know he did a Midsummer Night's Dream for BBC One a few years ago as like a TV movie. But
Hmm.
yeah, it's one of them things. Well, we'll see it in Doctor Who, I suppose. We'll see
I
it when they do
suppose, yeah.
historical episodes. Yeah, but it'll see one because the reboot, the first kind of reboot, and I don't think he writes a lot of the historical ones. Then not so much as the guest writers, maybe. Like he
Yeah, I'm
does
trying to
Chiefs of the
think of
Claw, he
which
does the
ones.
Queen Victoria one, but that was just like a
Yeah,
last minute thing. Like he commissioned that to somebody else who didn't follow the brief. So just ended up redoing that. But like this stuff with the impending Ncuti Gatwa era, there's people talking about, after It's a Sin, why doesn't he do, you could do a historical episode set at Stonewall, which I think is like ironically more in line with what Chris Chibnall would have done, because I think
yeah,
it's sort of
yeah.
where you do these historical things without thought to like, right, is Doctor Who too frivolous to be doing this? And I think that you could certainly, and the answer is not necessarily yes, it is too frivolous, but I'm saying the treatment in those, like, I can't see Russell T Davies doing an episode where he drops nowhere and he got Khan off to off to die in a concentration camp, saying, well, never mind, it'll be all right in the end.
Yes.
Don't
Yeah.
let the Nazis get you down, like horrific sort of tone deaf sort of thing. But it's that's sort of, I think, what the speculation is attached to
Mm.
like this, bold new era. Like certainly the people who are going, Rusty Davies is coming back, he'll make it less woke, like have not been watching anything that he did at the time or since, really. But yeah, I'd imagine if there's a historical episode of Doctor Who, that might be where you see that sort of thing come out.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I hope it is, as you say, a bold new era. I'm trying not
Yeah.
to judge the future of Doctor Who based on the 60th anniversary specials, because the 60th anniversary specials, any anniversary with a zero in the end has license to be a massive wank. That is part of what we want. But I hope that he doesn't pay any attention to the people who have brought him back on board, in the hope that everyone will say, remember Doctor Who? It's back in Ncuti Gatwa form. I hope that he continues to, I hope that he reinvents it as thoroughly as he did in 2005. I hope it feels as relevant to 2024 as something like Bad Wolf or Rose did to 2005. That's all I ask.
Yeah, I'm certain it will be at the time of recording. He's just done an interview where he's confirmed that the next series, like Ncuti Gatwa's first series, is going to be called Series 1 everywhere. Like they're doing what he did in 2005, which has number freaks up in arms. Again, he's done it again. We were already away for season 27 with Christopher Eccleston, and then he decided not to call it season 27. So, of course, no, it's not called Series 14. It's going like on Disney Plus and around the world and stuff. And
Yeah.
certainly, despite, I've been writing all these things, like which Doctor Who stories to watch for all new things, but I'm a hypocrite who writes for money. Like series 1 is going to be series 1, and I think it's going to be as much of a reinvention. If anything, I really hope that it's like Millie Gibson is an ordinary girl, she meets her new best friend, an alien, and it's that
Yep.
same thing. Like we don't have to
Yeah.
get into the Doctor as a character. That's my hope for it.
Well, it's
As far as
it's
it
quite
relates, sorry, go on.
it's quite a weird thing to be anxious about, because part of the sort of number anxiety is, oh, is it going to erase the show's history? And you think, if he could resist that impulse in 2005, where
Yeah,
there was like a very strong commercial reason to say, Doctor Who? No, never heard of that before. Tom Baker? Who's that?
yeah.
If he can resist doing it then, he's going to
Mm-hmm.
resist doing it now.
Yeah, if he didn't erase the TV movie or the Carmel Master Plan or the Valiard, he just got on with it and didn't think about them too much and just did new
Yeah.
stuff. That's the right thing to do. And if we all learn to do the same, then we'll all be much happier. We just get on with our lives and don't think about the Valiard and the Rani and the Morbius doctors.
Yes.
It's probably a better way to write Doctor Who. As it stands, the surprise when he was coming back, because it was later in the year that It's a Sin was first on, that it was announced he was coming back, and I just full on did Daffy Duck cartwheels around the house. Like I was very excited. But it's mad that it's coming back as it is, and as that's sort of like since that announcement, we've sort of seen it's going to take on more of a global scale, so it is going to be a bigger thing. But as far as it relates to It's a Sin, a lot of the speculation about who the next Doctor was going to be, is it going to be Olly Alexander from Years and Years, the band, not the show? Is it going to be Lydia West from the show, not the band? Is it going to be, any one of the other people? Callum Scott Howells would be a good one. Amari Douglas, it
Yeah.
was. But these are all people who I imagine will be in guest star roles, starting with Neil
Yeah.
Patrick Harris, probably in pretty
Yeah,
short
yeah,
order.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Starting off with Neil Patrick Harris in the fan favourite role of racist clown hopscotch man.
As he's called internationally. But they won't return the episodes for some reason. so Olly Alexander's performance, I think we should probably talk about before we get too late. And we can come back to Doctor Who. I'm happy for it.
Yeah. No,
Yeah,
Olly Alexander is really good. I think the ballsiest moment in It's a Sin, for all we've talked about it, it's politics, it's sort of on-screen sex, all of these things that could have backfired and could cause offence. The ballsiest thing in the whole fucking show is that episode 3 starts with a montage of audition scenes delivered by the one person in the cast whose day job isn't acting. And it's great. He nails every single one of them.
yeah, but then the auditions themselves are nightmarish. The wind is blowing you. It tears your shirt off. I said it tears your shirt off. Like absolutely bananas.
He needs some lessons from Stephen Toast on how to do good high wind acting.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where like I'd basically no, I'd seen films that he was in and not really clocked him being in films. So as you say, it is like for more or less a breakthrough role. It's an incredible performance.
I'm just looking that up now because I'd always solely been aware of him as the lead singer of Years and Years, and I'm
Yeah.
starting. My God, yes, I'd forgotten he was in Enter the Void. That must be where Russell T Davies saw him. I'm sure Rusty's a massive Gaspar Noé fan, right?
Well, there's a few. Yeah, he's in Le Weekend, which I think I watched after It's a Sin and didn't remember he was in that, so I don't know if it was a large role or not. But he's in all sorts of things, like films I haven't seen, like Bright Star. I have seen Gulliver's Travels, the 2010 film with Jack Black,
Oh,
and
the
he's only
film
got a minor role in that.
which stopped Emily Blunt from being Black Widow and is remembered for nothing else.
I think she's probably like, I'm okay with not being in all the giant
She's done
franchise
all
things.
right.
But she
Yeah.
does keep saying, stop asking me to be in the Fantastic Four, so I think she's probably at peace with it. Like that's always maddening to me because it's like John Krasinski would be a perfect Mr. Fantastic. It's like, right, you're saying that, so you're now saying she is also there. She also has to be there. It's dreadful. Anyway, yeah, so this was kind of like the first thing I've majorly seen him in. As you say, it's just impressive work because it's like the Keeley Horse thing is a difficult thing to pull off. You're gonna have the thing of he's a Russell T Davies hero in that he's complicated and he does the wrong thing. He's not a saint. Like being a saint falls to gel, but it doesn't make him a self-insert character either. He
Yeah.
gets a lot of the stuff that Davies confesses to, like the stuff he would say when it was first coming out. He'd like go on these rants because he's like reveling in how clever he is. Like what, like it affects hemophiliacs, Haitians, and homosexuals. Does it only target the letter H? Like he just puts dialogue in
Yeah.
there. But
And
yeah, go on.
and of course that is that particular speech is, I mean, it's fascinating to me because it's a speech that you should not agree with, but it's played like his crowning moment. It's played with him
Mm,
sort of doing all these Scorsese Copacabana shots,
yeah,
delivering it all to camera and being amazingly charismatic while talking utter shit. But it's also a reminder that the world Davies wrote It's a Sin in is not the world that it was released into, that this was one of the big shows of early lockdown.
yeah.
And I mean, we've talked a bit about one news story from today, but I just read before I came on this podcast evidence from the COVID inquiry that Boris Johnson asked his chief medical officers to tell him whether or not you could cure COVID by blowing a hairdryer up your nose, which makes Richie's AIDS cures sound pretty sensible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the stuff that we knew this when we were first watching It's a Sin. We knew that he would be like this, basically. But it's the
Yeah.
specifics that somehow make me furious all over again.
Yeah.
Fuck. Anyway, before I just start breaking things, yeah, as you say, he has the Scorsese-esque, like it's done as like it's so much who this character is, but with a dollop of dramatic irony. Like it's what makes this character great, but it's also everything about it that makes him wrong and that
Yeah.
sets everyone up for a fall. Is that it's the stuff that, like as you said, the lockdown context is interesting as well. Because you had these people. It's sort of flipped around here, where it was more of a fringe. I think like with COVID and stuff,
Mm.
it's more a fringe of going like, oh, it's all made up. it's a
Yeah.
scam. Like, we, the most powerful demographic in society, have been personally victimized for reasons. It's
I
the
think
inverse of that, but it's
the thing about it that I always find touching is that they're still like putting stickers on things going, "Don't wear masks." It's like, nobody's wearing a mask, you stupid cunt. Like, are you not keeping up with the news anymore?
Yeah, I mean, state of the world's fucked. But
Yeah.
again, that was something that, with it being released in lockdown, we all saw a lot more of Russell T Davies' office than ever before, where he's doing all these interviews where it's on Zoom.
Yeah.
But it's just, but he talks a lot in that, and he's right to say that there will probably be dramas. I mean, they've jumped the gun a little bit on some of these dramas. There have been dramas already that maybe could have waited a little while. Winterbottom. It will never. It will. As someone else remarked the other day, though, it'll never not be funny that Kenneth Branagh, who's older than Boris Johnson, had to put on old man makeup to play Boris Johnson. Only thing that's funny about that show. But it's in there. Like, it's this is the fruition of a long, like, something he's, as I say, had in mind since 1995. And God, the rhythms of it, as much as it's specific and grounded in the 80s, the way it relates to modern times, and not intentionally, clearly, because obviously it's not made in anticipation of a pandemic, but
Or is it, Mark? Is this a conspiracy?
This is why we have to sell Channel 4. This is all going to a little tinfoil hat.
But yeah, I know what you mean. It's. I suppose it is inevitable that as soon as a Conservative government is in power, they will fuck up any public health intervention in the most staggering way possible. So it's not exactly, clairvoyant, but it is uncanny that it was released into this time when we were thinking about things like, quarantines and public health measures in a way that we hadn't done since the original AIDS crisis.
Yeah.
That's a really bleak note. Have you got anything really stupid to say before the show ends? We could probably do with it.
Anything really stupid?
Yeah,
I normally be called upon for that. I'm still thinking of the little old man that's really slowly storming across, but yeah. On one more Doctor Who note, again, it's all episode 4 for me. That's the one that, like, I remembered best from beginning to end. Really got the when they get to the Daleks thing, and it's him writing COD Dalek story dialogue, like, we have to stop them getting the crystal, because if they get the crystal, that's the end of the world. It's like,
yes.
So there's someone who misses writing. So it's not that simple.
But even not just Davies, I think Peter Hoare really captured the resurrection of the Daleks style of pitched gun battles between people who were about 3 centimeters away from each other.
Yeah. Yeah, just shooting, like, even though bullets aren't going to work, just sitting and waiting to die.
And still somehow missing most of their shots. Like, so they're like right pressed up against each other, and still no one actually hits each other.
Yeah, the dog's really concerned. They're just like, extermination. I've been exterminated. He's fine. He's dealing with it.
He's got over it quickly. Yeah.
So, massively exciting that he's back on Doctor Who, even with the fact that it's a very different. It's sort of, the run that he's had in between of, like, more adult dramas.
Yeah.
I am going to miss that, I think, because I think you will get, it's what always got worked out in Doctor Who, the stuff that's in there, the more emotional through lines and stuff. But, granted, it's also going to be a show that the BBC now needs to take a production partner on, so now it's a Disney Plus concern. So, there's, like, I'm really, really interested to see where it's going to go. And I hope it's as different as possible from his own previous stuff.
Same. Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hoping for. But yes.
He's fine.
He's fine, yeah. But yeah, before we go, you should tell people where they can find you on social media, Mark.
You find me on Twitter, Harrison90. You can find me on Blue Sky, a proper website, mark.harrison at bsky.social. They're still working out the URL thing, but I've actually got my own name. I think it's Mark.
Nice.
I'm going to have to check. Is it Mark Harrison? It's still new. It's still all new. I'm figuring that out. Yeah, and you can also find me on Film Stories, doing weekly film quizzes. And at the moment, a decade by decade Fool's Errand, series, kind of chronicling all of Doctor Who. I've written the 60s and 70s. We've got a couple of writers in to do the 80s. And there's a lovely 3,000 word piece on the 90s coming up next week, which is like, you'd think wouldn't be much to cover, but it's a very, very strong article about the weirdness of things that happened in between, Old Testament and New Testament, and who, for one thing, I never knew about Crank Up Your Grannies, hosted by John Pertwee, in character as the Third Doctor. But that's something to look on filmstories.co.uk for if you fancy reading about
that. Okay. Yes, I'm on Letterboxd and Instagram. I'm on Letterboxd as Graham Williamson. I'm on Instagram as Graham W Films. You can find The Geek Show on Instagram at TGS_The Geek Show, which is also how it is for the time being, I guess, on the website formerly known as Twitter, because no one's expecting it to be around by January.
I just checked, bearing in mind, I did just check. I'm Mark Harrison, no dot, on Blue Sky. I'm Mark.Harrison on Instagram.
It's very important to get your escape hatches in order, yes. But our most important link is, of course, our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Geek Show, where, among other things, you will get weekly Doctor Who reviews by me, as well as written pieces on classic Asian genre cinema, Red Dwarf, and The X-Files. You also get a monthly bonus episode for this very show. The most recent one is me attempting to explain to other Mark Cunliffe, why Taylor Swift is great. It's something different. It's fun. But we will be back in a fortnight's time with the first of a series with my formative podcasting friend Rob Simpson on Nick Cave, covering 20,000 Days on Earth. Until then, we'll see you later. That's been your lot from Pop Screen. I've been Graham.
I've been Mark. Hang on, let me see if I can get the pitch. La!
La!
You got one. Hey! I wasn't sure if you were going to leave me hanging there.